So for today's episode, I'm going to be doing a step-by-step process for how I color using ClipStudioPaint. So let's get to it. Today's picture, I'm going to be coloring Rey from The Last Jedi. And so the first thing I do is I set up a couple of reference pictures. In this case, I have you can't see it on screen, but I have a picture of Rey from The Last Jedi that I will be using. I will be using my color picker, which is here, the eyedropper, to grab colors off of the officially released photograph of Rey. That immediately makes coloring a lot easier. When you have a reference picture to go off of when coloring your picture. An important thing too is to turn off anti-alias. So in ClipStudioPaint there is an anti-alias tool property, I guess, and you can go from none, weak, middle, strong, and so make sure that's on none for both the eraser and for the brush. If you don't know what anti-alias is, you see these jagged edges here? If I turn on anti-alias, it makes a softer edge. But when you have a softer edge, you can't use the bucket fill. So that's why you redo that. Bucket fill is very useful for saving time. For example, I just need to kind of go around the edges like that and bucket fill, and it's done. Right now, yes, I know that the color of her skin is a little bit dark, but we're gonna fix that real soon. Just right now, I don't want to focus too much on that right now. So I'm gonna get the skin tones in. Okay, now the skin tones are in. We can just adjust the color here. Okay, so here I'm just going to punch out the eyes real quick. In case you're wondering, I'm drawing the canvas for this picture is 1,500 pixels by 1,500 pixels. And I'm just going to quickly go through and put in all of the flat color elements on Rey. And I forgot to close up the spot here. Okay, and I expect this picture is going to take me about 30 minutes to color. I'm not putting in a background because in this series of pictures it's just going to be white backgrounds. Let's save some time. And so, this flat color process really sets the stage for the entire picture. I would say that, just make sure your edges, make sure you're not spilling out of the outline. That's going to be important later, which I'll show you. Looks like there is a little bit of fabric there, so I'm going to do that. It looks like she's wearing 3 layers. So here I'm just going to fix up this line work a little bit. You can see that third layer a little clearer. I was talking with someone the other day and I realized, well, not that you need to realize, but I was thinking to myself, what what intellectual properties out there am I like, the biggest fan of? And I'd have to say, you know, as if you haven't already guessed from my channel, I have to say Star Wars and Transformers. Something about these two franchises make it really easy to, you know, just jump in, have a lot of fun, kind of keep up with, you know, everything that's going on, like, you know, TV shows, movies, toys, and, you know, just the sight of the characters makes you have a certain feeling, you know. You know, I'd say, you know, even the colors, it has to do with the colors, and it has to do, like when I see, you know, a Transformer, I see just those colors, you know, like each character has his colors. It's like the colors immediately, like, make you feel something, you know. So. Star Wars is definitely a lot more, like, emotional and everything, so it's harder to dive in and out of Star Wars. But that's, you know, kind of what I've realized about what, you know, the changes Disney has brought to Star Wars is I'm finally realizing that it's a good thing, because they're making Star Wars something that's more something, like I just said, like you can jump in and out of without all the emotional stuff. I guess it's I don't know, how would you describe it? It's more accessible at any given time. I would say Rogue One is more like the older Star Wars movies in that it's pretty emotional in terms of like the weight of what happens, you know, or the weight of the things that are happening. Whereas Force Awakens, you know, I finally rewatched it. So I've only watched it twice. Once, you know, when it was released, and once the other day. You know, I thought I would just catch up, or kind of refresh before going in to see The Last Jedi. So yeah, and I watched it and I really enjoyed it. And, you know, sorry if that sounds like, if I make it sound like I'm surprised, but, you know, I didn't enjoy it as much because I went in looking for, you know, a certain kind of emotional tone that I was expecting from a Star Wars movie. So, you know, to me, Force Awakens doesn't have that emotional tone. It's a lot more light. But this time, you know, watching it, actually I should say, watching Rogue One the second time and watching Force Awakens the second time, I enjoyed Force Awakens more than Rogue One. As opposed to the first time I watched the Rogue One and the first time I watched Force Awakens, I enjoyed Rogue One more. Because I think I'm transitioning. As a Star Wars fan, I'm transitioning to more of a, like, I like the light feeling of The Force Awakens. So we'll see how Last Jedi, you know, pans out in terms of everything. But, you know, I realized too that I don't have to like it on first watching, because I know that, you know, when it comes time for the second watching, I know that potentially I could change my mind, you know. So I don't hold hard and fast to anything in terms of how I feel after a movie. Not as much anymore. At least where Star Wars is concerned. Okay, so after all that talking, I finished the flat color for Rey. So now I'm going to go in and I'm going to add a new layer, and it's going to be a multiply layer, and I'm going to start adding shadows. So for my shadow value, I'm going to do about 25% here. And I'm going to pick a light source. And it's always cool. Oh, and one more thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit this button called Clip at Layer Below. It's in your layer palette. And when you click that, you select the multiply layer that we just added, our shadow layer, called a shad. And if you click at layer below, you're going to see a red line appear. And what that does is it makes sure that, you know, any strokes that you add won't fall outside of the flat color layer. So if I turn off clip at layer below, you'll see that the shadow that I just added, you know, I can color outside of the flat color layer. But when I turn on clip at layer below, it clips everything outside of the flat color layer. To me, that's a pretty handy tool, pretty cool, that I use quite often. So as far as the shadow, I'm going to do a light source from the right side. It's something that I tend to do. And I'm also going to put her face in the shadow because it creates kind of a cool effect, which hopefully you agree with, and that, you know, we'll be able to see later on when this is done. Just basically going to wash pretty much her front side in shadow here. And what I'm using, the brush I'm using here is called the watercolor brush, which I talk about in every episode. As you're shading, you know, just keep in mind the light source. Don't forget where that light is coming from. I mean, it's like, I really want to see The Last Jedi tomorrow night, Thursday night, which is when it opens here in America. But it's really cold right now. It's cold, and it's gonna be probably gonna be crowded. So, you know, I want to have a good seat. You know, I want. So I gotta figure out when I'm gonna watch it. But definitely, hopefully, soon after Thursday, as soon as I can. So you can kind of see I'm going back and I'm adding sort of a second pass on the shadows. And this time I'm adding, like, you know, harder shadow lines. I'm adding all kinds of stuff. So one thing I learned about watercolors is it's kind of the same thing, is that you make a pass, you make a light pass, and then you go back and then you know, add layer upon layer. And the more layers of color that you add, you know, going from light, you know, the first time pressing light and then second time pushing harder and things like that, then overall you get this incredible depth of color and range to your art. Okay, so that's the gray layer, and then what I do almost always now is I add a shad 2 layer, and on this layer I add a little bit of a purple tinge. It's a grayish purple tinge that I like to add, and this thing I add more liberally. Change the multiply layer. I add it more liberally. I'm not going in, you know, with a fine-tuned watercolor brush. It's more of a sort of I use the airbrush tool. I go in with a broad brush, kind of touch sort of this shadow area and give it just a little bit more dimension. Her eyes are getting a little bit dark here, so I'm gonna pull out some of the purple here in her eyes. I want her eyes to shine a bit more. So there, her eyes pop a little bit there. Okay, and then the third step that I do is I add an overlay layer, which is basically your highlight layer, so let's call it high. And I like to go with kind of a bluish, ever so slightly blue highlight. And you know, you can go in, actually, yeah, you can go in broader as well to start off with, and then go in and kind of fine tune it. Yeah, but anyway, I alternate between the airbrush and the watercolor brush here. So put her nose back there a little bit. A little bit of highlight on the nose and the lip there. And let's give her some highlights on the hair. A little bit better here, where I add in a few strokes of the watercolor brush, and then I go in with the airbrush and kind of soften it up. Here, you know, keeping in mind the fabric, you're not going to get a very even highlight on it. So I've kind of split up the highlights here on the fabric here on her arm. Now the leather, you will get a little bit more of an even tone. So that's that. Here, this is a kind of fabric. So let's see what we can do here. All right, no, let's just stick with the highlights for now. Sort of an intricate texture on this part of her fabric. So we'll see what we can do with that later. Alright, and then just add a little bit of highlight here in case people can't see her leg there. Okay, and then just a little bit of highlight here. So it just pops a little bit. No matter where the lightsaber is, you're going to want a little bit of highlight in it. Okay, so that's the overlay layer. We can add a little bit to her eyes. And I'm going to soften up, I'm going to turn off these layers for now. I'm just going to soften up the line around her eyes. I'm going to turn on anti-alias here because I want the eyes to be softer. The line around the eyes to be softer. So we'll be zooming in on that a lot. Okay. Turn these layers back on. I'm going to take off a little bit of shadow off her face because I think it's a little bit too obscured. There. It's a little better. Okay, and then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add an add glow layer. And this is where, again, we use, this time a brighter purple. So just playing off of the purple we put on earlier. Let's see how this looks. Again, don't forget to turn on the clip at layer below. Make sure that any lines that go outside are clipped off. So here you can start to see where the highlights really pay off. And you get zoom out, you can kind of see how that works. And this is really a testament to also to the how awesome the add glow layer is, because the way it interacts with the colors is, to me, I get excited. I get excited every time it's that step in the process, you know, where it's time to add the add glow, you know, and I get excited because Clip Studio has really added something powerful here with add glow. I don't know if there's an equivalent in Photoshop. That's weird. So you can kind of see, like I was saying earlier, how, you know, the flat color layer is basically the guideline for your entire piece. So anywhere, you know, where the jagged edges are really starting to bother you, I would recommend softening those edges, because like you just saw, you know, it's hard to separate the purple there, the purple highlights. Even in the line work here, how you can see how this shoulder doesn't look quite as smooth as you would like. Okay, now let's go back in and see what we can do here. Let's grab that purple again. Let's see if we can add that and separate it out a little better there. Yeah, that's better. There we go. Still looks a little bit weird. I don't think you need as much highlight on that shoulder, now that I think of it. So let's skip it for now and move down. So here is where we can kind of use the decoration tool, and I like to use gauze. I wonder why the anti-alias is not there. Okay, so for gauze I'm going to use anti-alias a little bit. No, it doesn't look good. Okay, forgot I said anything. Again, you're just trying to pepper in this purple, but you want to stay like real close to the edge, because the power of the highlight, this purple highlight, is that it creates this really kind of nice outline, but you don't want to like have it overwhelm too much of the art. You know, it's sort of this minimalist thing. I'm kind of debating if I should have her lightsaber on or off. I mean, as you can see, I drew this sketch with the lightsaber off. I don't know. I mean, I might change it later, you know, depending on how she acts in Last Jedi. If she's like really aggressive, then I might, you know, redo this and have this picture have the lightsaber on, you know. Honestly, I think I'm good with anything they decide for Last Jedi. I mean, I'm really at that point where, like, I want that, or I felt like The Force Awakens was very organic in a way. Like, they didn't let past, you know, let the past movies over dictate like what they were gonna do. You know. By that I mean I don't, by that, just to clarify what I mean by that, I mean that, like, Kylo Ren stops like a blaster in midair, or blaster fire, stops blaster fire in midair. Like, that's not something we've ever seen before, but there wasn't any hesitation to like do that, which I now think is kind of cool, because it's organic in a way that I think if they want to pursue it more, like, why can Kylo Ren, why does he have that level of power? They can pursue it, or if kind of like the midichlorians, it's like if they never want to show Kylo Ren do that again, they never have to. I don't think everything needs an explanation anymore. Or I don't think everything needs to be super, super consistent. I just want to see, a little bit of experimentation. I want to see some character development, see some new planets, see some new surprises. I mean, I think that's part of it too, is that I'm excited to see, what surprises they have in store, because that's part of enjoying the movies too, is that you want to be surprised, you want something new, you want them to be daring with it. All that good stuff. So yeah, I felt like, were they thinking on their feet a little bit when they made The Force Awakens? Now, yes, I totally feel that way. It feels very organic. It feels like they said, okay, let's try this, let's try that, and I think it worked out. Now, I think there are other older fans like me who are coming around as well. I think. Okay, so after adding the glow layer, so you can kind of see I've added this sort of purple tinge. The last layer I add is called an add layer. It's just basically where I go in and I just kind of add like little stuff that sits on top of all the other art. So it's just a normal layer. It's not being affected by any of the other layers. I just draw right on top of everything and kind of add those specular highlights. I can add some more highlights in places. I don't have to worry about the constraints of the blending modes, because blending modes have certain constraints. Alright, well, this might have finished earlier than I expected. One of the last things we can do also on the add layer is just to add a white light, which I've been adding for this series, which is kind of opposite the purple highlight side. I add a sort of piercing white light kind of behind the characters. And the cool thing about the piercing white light is that it kind of, like when you have any gaps in the art, a good example of a gap is like right there. When you have the white light kind of piercing through a gap, it adds a really kind of cool effect. You know, like that. Put one right there too. Yeah. All right, and that's the picture for today. I hope that was helpful. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions about any of the steps or if I went too fast in any area, feel free to ask. All right, I'll see you in the next video.